Good morning. This is Haley Solomon with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. Thank you for joining us this morning for our housing call. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our Director of Housing Policy, Stephanie Watkins-Cruz.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you all are having a great week so far. We're going to go ahead and kick it off. Just going to jump right into federal updates. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition is calling on all advocates to comment in support of HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development's recent notice of proposed rulemaking. This recent notice addresses reducing barriers to HUD-assisted housing and would make really important changes to their existing screening regulations for applicants that have conviction histories or a history of involvement with the criminal legal system. The proposed changes would reduce unnecessary barriers to HUD-assisted housing that too often prevent people that are impacted by the criminal legal system from accessing housing. The deadline for advocates to submit their comments is June 10th. And so make sure you check out the link in the call notes that will take you to both the rule, but then also please feel free to reach out if you need ideas or want to see some of the comments that are being made already and submitted for this possibly historic change in their process. House Appropriations Chair Cole released top-line funding levels for fiscal year 25 appropriations and the timeline for their committee work last week. So for the fiscal year 25 Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, the THUD bill allocation grew 2% from last year, but it's still unclear how funding will actually be divided between housing and transportation. So from now, what starts to happen is the subcommittees will begin drafting their spending plans, and then the THUD committee will review the proposed fiscal year 25 spending plans in late June. It is unlikely that any of these spending bills will be passed before the November election. And so we are partnering with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, or really aligning with them in their call to ask you all to ask Congress to reach out to your representatives and really advise them to provide the highest possible funding for HUD's affordable housing and homelessness programs for fiscal year 25, including several different priorities. Before I list those priorities, just to kind of remind folks, this most recent budget that passed, we had to do a lot of advocacy just to maintain and sustain levels of service. And so we not only want to continue to be able to sustain levels of service and ensure that people don't lose their homes, but we also want some additional funding and investment to happen. We would like full funding to renew all existing contracts for the Housing Choice Voucher Program and also to expand assistance to 20,000 more households, to fund the public housing operation and public housing capital needs at $6.2 billion and $5.2 billion respectively, to allocate $4.7 billion for HUD's Homeless Assistance Grant Program and $100 million for the Eviction Prevention Grant Program, and at least $1.3 billion for tribal housing programs, with an additional $150 million for competitive funds that can target tribes with the greatest needs. So those are just a few of the resources of the priorities from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. If you would like more information about that, we'll include some links in the call notes for you. Moving on to state updates and state legislative updates. Tomorrow, the policy team here at the North Carolina Housing Coalition will be spending the day at the North Carolina General Assembly. So we will be in Raleigh, and we will be talking to representatives about several things. We'll be talking to them about the importance of investing in our state housing trust fund and the workforce housing loan program. We will also be emphasizing the need to really begin to proactively address the future of our disaster recovery and resiliency infrastructure and how it connects with community development, and to talk about the importance of improving coordination at the state level and thinking about how they're going to invest in housing and community development in the future, as well as protecting and supporting agencies that are critical for our state housing ecosystem, such as the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, and what policy changes need to occur for that to happen. So we will actually be releasing some follow-up calls to action after our visit tomorrow, and we will make sure that we fill you in about not only how the visits went, but what you can do to kind of keep the momentum going. Because again, like we mentioned last week in our Housing Minute, your voice carries a lot more weight, and we want to make sure that they hear from you. We are also going to include in the call notes for you, our full bill tracker is back. You will notice that there might be some bills missing. So this version of our bill tracker includes only the bills eligible for consideration during short session that were introduced during the long legislative session or recently introduced. So there are several bills that were introduced last legislative session that did not make it to the crossover deadline, and so they aren't reflected in this tracker. However, we do still know which ones those are, and so if you would like a list of those, just reach out to our team, and we will gladly send those your way. Moving to local community updates. It is budget season, and it has been for quite some time for local governments across North Carolina. So we're keeping an eye on various affordable housing investments under consideration, and we will make sure to report back in the coming weeks as different budgets pass before the upcoming deadline of June 30th, because their fiscal years begin on July 1st. Just an advocacy tip for folks, if you don't already do this, I really recommend that no matter where you are in your state, in the state, that you look at your county's budget, your town's budget process. Budget season actually begins as early as October in the year prior. So, for example, this upcoming year's budget conversations really began as early as September or October. That's when they start talking about capital improvements. And then the spring is when you hear a lot about work sessions and different commissioner meetings or joint meetings where they have different presentations and look at metrics and are getting different data from departments, but also from the state when different revenue numbers come back. And so make sure to keep an eye on this, because it also shows you kind of where the money is going, where they're thinking about putting the money. And there are a lot of opportunities, a lot more than you may think, to really make your voices heard. Moving on, last week, Habitat for Humanity of Forsyth County partnered with the Home Builders Association of Winston-Salem to have a Builders Blitz event and to build 5 homes over 5 days in the Happy Hill neighborhood. And so looking ahead, the Housing Authority in Winston-Salem also has plans to add townhomes and detached homes to this Happy Hill neighborhood as well. So a great example of not only partnership, but also of a mixed housing types all in one neighborhood. Last week, the town of Chapel Hill voted unanimously to adopt a resolution to proceed with a $44 million general obligation bond referendum that will be on the ballot in November, that designates $15 million towards affordable housing. So the town plans to introduce the bond orders at the June 5th council meeting. So that's great. Additional investment happening, hopefully happening in Chapel Hill. So that will be announced. The rules will be announced in June. But again, this is something that the public needs to vote on in Chapel Hill in November to make sure that it passes and that this investment can happen. The City of Durham is in the process of conveying a dozen vacant city-owned properties to affordable housing developers. 3 in particular: Habitat for Humanity Durham, Durham Community Land Trustees, and Black Land Development Corporation are planning to build affordable units once the land is conveyed. Again, great examples of public-private partnerships and of leveraging public resources for the creation and preservation of affordable housing. Moving on to events. Today, later this afternoon, there is a webinar titled Advancing Homelessness Solutions, Using the Fiscal Year 25 Appropriations Process to Fund Solutions to Homelessness. This webinar is being hosted by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, and the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. So again, this webinar is today, later this afternoon from 2 to 3 p.m. It's free, and we have the registration link in the call notes. I highly recommend going to this webinar. One, not only can it help you make a little sense of the federal appropriations process, but also sort of all the different ways that housing and community development and homelessness programs are wrapped up in the appropriations process and what you could do to really advocate on their behalf. Also today, if you are in the western part of the state, there is a fair housing training at the City of Asheville, hosted by the City of Asheville, Buncombe County, and the Land of Sky Regional Council. at the Dr. Leslie Grant Southside Community Center. So there is a registration link there. It is in person. If you would like to attend, the link is in the comments. Tomorrow afternoon, there's another webinar, a national call for safe, affordable housing for infants and toddlers, with opportunity starts at home tomorrow at 3 p.m. So this is an online event, an online opportunity. Many of you may have been seeing our partner highlights, and you may have seen our highlight of Empty Child, and let's talk about our partnership through the Opportunity Starts at Home grant. So this will be a great event and a great program that highlights the intersection between, child welfare policy, health, and affordable housing. Moving on to reports and resources, we have several here for you, but I want to list up two in particular. There's one from the Joint Center for Housing Studies of Harvard that talks about how rural areas saw disproportionate home price growth during the pandemic. They noted that according to Zillow, between March 2020 and March 2023, typical home values in the U.S. increased about 36%. But this wasn't uniform geographically. Because of the expansion of remote work, it allowed a lot of households to look further afield for housing, which changed the migration trends away from some of the larger, higher cost places in favor of lower density, lower cost counties and rural areas, which in turn raised the home prices and home values and sort of the demand for affordable housing in those areas. That's not to say that the migration patterns flipped completely and there's no growth in urban areas, but because of the expansion of remote work, there was a lot of growth in home price growth during the pandemic, particularly the last 3 years in these areas that we may not have seen, that we did not see pre-pandemic. Another piece I want to list up is from the Urban Institute and their Housing Matters part of that application. They talk about how racism affects American neighborhoods. This talks about the intersection of racism, the built environment, as well as different health outcomes. And so you'll see a lot of different policy fields sort of come together in this piece. The authors in this study actually created an index called the Structural Racism Effect Index and used it as a measure where they observed census tract level data to look at and create a score that compared resources available to different U.S. communities with different corresponding health indicators. So this is a really actually interesting study, and I think it does a great job of showing how our neighborhoods, our homes are not just homes and places we go to lay our head down at night, but they have extreme impact and effects on our quality of life and on our friends and family and the people around us, on their quality of life as well. In the news, again, several links. Housing is not staying out of the news. We know that there are a lot of pieces still coming out about how Gen Z and millennials are concerned about their finances. There's one piece out of USA Today saying that the growing concerns about finances in those generations have led some folks to be preoccupied that they will end up homeless. There's also new research that shows some changes in the community development field and how that has actually been helpful recently. And then a marketplace piece about U.S. rents growing far faster than wages for the past 5 years, which we know is happening, and which is one of the reasons why we highlight housing wage in our county profiles, as well as average income earned to show that gap. An additional piece that might be of interest is actually outside of North Carolina is from the Texas Tribune, talking about the city of Austin and the sweeping reforms that they are attempting to pass and implement in order to cut down on housing costs. And early research so far does show that the prices in that area have remained relatively stable compared to other cities of comparable size. That's all we got for you today, everyone. Again, we'll be at the General Assembly tomorrow. We'll have some follow-up action items for you all after our visit. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we will talk to you next time. An important reminder is that we will not be having a housing call on the week of bringing it home. So make sure that June 4th through the 5th, you know that we will be having a housing call that day. All right. Have a great one. Talk to you next time.